Welcome to the Mindset Meets Money podcast, where money makes sense.
We are at the table with Dr. Jason Heller again, talking about biases and how you make decisions from an emotional perspective that might negatively affect your investments. I see that you came to us at a table with a homeless look today. No longer wearing your dress shirt, your suit and all that, just some hoodie you got from the local thrift shop.
I'm going with the axe from Billions. I'm going with that. I prefer that as opposed to homeless.
Professor of financial planning or a billionaire hedge fund manager, same thing.
Sure.
Yeah. So what are we talking about today? I think we're talking about anchoring biases. Is that correct?
So today we're going to talk about the anchoring effect. So you see this a lot in we see this a lot in investing, but you also see this in commercial retail stuff. We'll talk about that in a second. So anchoring is individuals' decisions are affected by a specific reference point or an anchor. Okay? So a good example is, let's say you've been investing for a couple of years, right? And this year, which has been a tough year in the market, right? I think the market's down some 20% so far year to date. Here are December 28th, right? Mm-hmm. So people will look at this and say, I'm down 20%. And the truth of it is, if you widen out your lens, you're not down 20%. You started a couple of years ago. You're up because last year was a very good year. The year before was a good year. The year before that was a good year. So people will anchor into a specific dollar amount on their portfolio, and they will only focus on the myopic loss that has happened in that very short period of time. And when you widen out that frame, it reframes the whole situation and allows them to make different decisions that they wouldn't make if they were only focusing on that anchor.
Well, let's slow down and deconstruct that a little bit. So what you're saying is people tend to anchor on to the highest number typically. Is that what normally happens?
Yes.
So, the high water mark of my portfolio is I anchor on and say, this is what my portfolio is worth.
Yeah.
And so if we had, some unreasonable run in the market, if there was a normal pullback, we're still stuck on that. So my portfolio goes from $1 million to $1.5 million in the last 2 years. So I'm up 50%, let's say for 2 years, but then it pulls back to $1.3 million. Instead of saying I'm up 30% in 2 years, you're saying you're down 50, whatever,
20 grand. I'm down 200 grand.
Yeah. I'm down 200 grand. So you're kind of stuck on the down part of that.
Correct.
How does anchoring to that high water mark, instead of looking at a longer term view, affect decision making in a positive manner for you managing your investments?
So people will focus myopically on losses. More often than not, people are myopically loss averse, right? We do not like to take losses. That's, again, I'm not giving you any hot takes here. Nobody likes to take losses, right? Yeah. They will focus.
You are a Miami fan?
Yes.
So you're getting used to this fact of taking an L?
It's been 20 years. Yes, I'm quite used to it now. We're a basketball school nowadays. What can I tell you?
I used to play basketball, so that fits better.
There you go, right? Still would never be able to play at Miami. So 20 years.
Is that a height thing or is that a skill thing?
It's a lot of both. Just a lot of both.
Sorry, go back.
Just a lot.
People don't like taking losses.
People don't like taking losses, especially how he does that. And in a very short period of time, people will focus on those losses, right? Yeah. So when people get overly emotional on losses, they will tend to make decisions that are typically adverse to their long-term plan, right? So if you're anchored in, so let's use your example. I invested $1 million. My $1 million grew to 1.5 over a number of years at a very good return. And then this year I'm down, call it 20%. So I'm down to 1.2, right? So, someone who thinks they're down 300 grand as opposed to in reality up $200,000 might make a different decision on whether to stay the course or change their investments.
Meaning they might move to cash. They might decide to fire a financial advisor that helped get them there.
Yep.
They might decide to, change their investment strategy, moving to heavier bonds versus stocks and move more conservative perspective.
Correct.
They're going to make some overarching big strategic decision in how they're managing their financial plan, not based on fact, but based on a bias that they anchored into the higher level.
Yep. So I'll give you a good example. I had a client who started with me in 2019, mid 2019. So 2019 was a good year. 2020, despite COVID early, was a good year long term. 2021 was a very good year, and then this year's been rough. And the dollar amounts were actually not too far off from your example there. And he was absolutely ready, not to fire me, but to pull everything into cash about a month ago. A couple months ago. He was ready to pull everything into cash in September. September was a particularly bad month this year. And our discussion was about pulling back his viewpoint and getting him off the anchor of his January 1st value, which was the height of his portfolio. He said, Jason, I'm down 25, I'm down 27%, which I think pretty close to what the market was at that period of time. And Arthur, you're not. If we look back at it, you're actually up 25% since we began together. Oh, you're right. That's what we started with. And he backed off of it. Thankfully, he backed off because he wanted desperately to put everything into cash. October was a great month, a big rebound in the market. He picked back up. I think the market was up close to 10% in October. Mm-hmm. Had he made decisions off that anchor point from his January value, and had we not discussed it, had we not pulled back, he would have pulled out of the market. He would have missed a sizable run in October, and he would have solidified a much deeper loss than what he currently has right now.
Really good example of the importance of having another professional or just another person, there to be able to help put things into a factual perspective than opposed to an emotional perspective in making a decision. We see this a lot with clients, but the top financial advisors and financial planners have this ability to be able to give a better global look at an overall financial situation and educate their clients to be able to make that decision. It was still his choice to make the decision to stay invested completely. But now he had different facts to be able to do it. And he was able to not be stuck on this biases, this anchor bias that he had in about to make a financial decision.
Right.
So as you look and same question I always ask is, you're a client or you're an investor and you're starting to make a decision based on an anchor bias. How do you know you're making that decision? How do you know an anchor bias is affecting you?
Right. So if we're talking about investments, and by the way, we talked about it earlier, we haven't given the example yet, but the retail world tries to use anchoring against you, and we'll talk about it in a second.
When you say the retail world, you mean like retail, like sales, like I'm going in a store and buying a shirt?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So we'll talk about how they do it in a second. But this is an easier one to overcome. You just have to remember one pretty basic rule is don't worry about what the height of the portfolio may have been, because that tends to be, like you said earlier, where people anchor into. Go back to what you started with. What is your principle? Okay. Now, again, we've seen portfolios, they don't always go up. Sometimes you have a bad run from the very beginning and you're anchored into what you put into it. That is less punitive to your decision-making process than what we talked about earlier. Made a bunch of money, lost a little bit, and now you're more myopically focused on what you lost as opposed to what you gained and the quality of the portfolio itself.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And so if you realize you're having some self-talk or talking to a financial advisor or even yourself saying, my portfolio is down X, let me make a decision because I feel like I should, right? As soon as you realize your portfolio is down and you're deciding to make a decision because of that, you have to decide, is your portfolio down because you have a poor fundamental financial plan or investment strategy and your portfolio is underperforming for that reason? Or are you deciding to make a decision because you've anchored to the high watermark and you're making a decision because what you're comparing it to, than opposed to how you should be managing an investment portfolio?
And that decision is an emotional decision, right? The long term, if the portfolio is sound, if the plan is sound, we know there's going to be ups and downs in the plan. Not falling victim to that emotional decision because you anchored to the high watermark. That's the key. And how do you do that? You do that through, this is a common thread through all of our episodes, but it's through education, right? So let's spin this real quick to how retail does this. So retail will, I'm going to use the insurance world as an example. Okay. Most people have absolutely no idea what insurance costs, what life insurance might cost, right? Unless you bought it before, unless you've been through the process, you have no idea what it costs. So you'll see these term insurance commercials. Would you pay $100 a month for a $500,000 term life policy. And you have no idea how old the person is that they're talking about, what the health rating is.
Smoker,
right. It's all in these tiny little fine print at the very bottom of the page, the screen. You have no idea. But you anchor into, okay, well, 100, because it's the first number you heard. So you anchor into $100. When you come to find out that it's a 25-year-old, they're doing a 10-year term and they're ultra preferred and it's $25 a month, you look at that and you say, oh my God, what a great deal. That's a lot less than I thought it would be. And it motivates you to potentially go purchase it on your own. So retail does this all the time, where they take this lack of knowledge on the consumer's part and they throw out a big number up front. And then when the true number is much lower, you are more motivated because you think you're getting a deal.
See, I thought it'd be the opposite. So I think that, car ads back in the day or even online, right? They drop a lease price or a payment price that's a lower number and then actually bump you up afterwards and they bring you in on that lower number on that side.
Okay. So your dad was in the car industry, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's kind of like, okay, that's a different one. All right. We'll
different bias.
Yeah. We'll kind of get to that later, but that's once they have you and you're in the showroom, right? Now it's almost it's called sunk cost. You don't want to, you've used your time.
You're already invested in your time and all the stuff.
Right?
You're going to that
so
point.
To walk out completely is a very difficult thing to do.
Gotcha.
Right?
We'll save that for another episode.
We'll save that for another episode. One of the other, you ever go to like the coffee shop and, you get your coffee and then they flip the thing around. You have to,
give them a tip.
Give them a tip.
Yeah.
Okay. So, it's 20, 22%, 25%.
Yeah.
What's the one you always pick?
20.
Okay, you pick 20.
Yeah.
So do I, by the way. Most people pick the middle one.
Yeah.
Okay. So they anchor into, 25 is too much.
Yeah.
20 looks cheap.
I like now how they give the words to great, outstanding, and then you're like, oh man,
right. I'm being mean to them. Right.
Picking okay at 20%. Right. Yeah. The part for me is when they just put the dollar amounts in. It's only like $2.50 for the coffee, and then it's $1, $2. And I'm like, I'm about to give 100% tip at $2, but $2 doesn't feel like a lot of money.
Because you do the math real quick. You're irrational about it. Right. Most people will just look at it and they'll make the decision. So, another good example of this, years ago, before I met my wife, before I got married, I was on a date with a girl. I don't drink wine, so I have no idea about it. And
you're a beer drinker.
I'm a beer drinker and gin and all that,
yeah.
Awful stuff for you. But
it's interesting how many people are not gin drinkers though.
They're missing out. Yeah. What I can tell you. So we're at dinner and, I don't know wine from anything. Yeah. And, thank God for the waiter because they hand her the wine list and then she's like, well, you pick. And the waiter's like, he kind of guided me to it. And he said, listen, take the one from the second to the bottom.
Yeah.
Because she got good back. A, doesn't make you look cheap. And B, you're not spending at the absolute top.
Yeah.
And because we anchored into the top and I was not going to pay because I couldn't tell the difference between that and, box wine.
Yeah.
I had no clue.
Yeah.
But so retail will purposely throw out
a big
higher numbers,
yeah,
knowing that you're never going to pay that and knowing that they want you
to automatically pulls you up from the price it was at before.
And the truth of it is the margin on that second from the bottom bottle of wine was probably much higher for them than the top bottle.
Gotcha.
And they're pushing me down toward that second to bottle one because they anchor in the top.
Yeah, it doesn't seem as expensive. My choice is $1,000 bottle of wine or
Correct.
70 sounds great.
Correct.
But you'd be told that bottle of wine should have been $12.
This is the difference between you and me and the 20 years ago that I did this. It wasn't $1,000 to the top. It was $200 to the top. 30 at the
or the restaurants that we go to, right?
Yeah, that's a very big difference. Those are the differences.
I thought I was being cheap with that $1,000 bottle of wine. All right. So anchoring on the retail side is the higher number, and then they actually get you to go up because you're already stuck on the higher number there.
Yeah.
So go back to I'm a client or I'm an investor. Mm-hmm. And, I realized that I have an anchor bias.
Yep.
And now I decided to go, oh, wow, my portfolios, I believe right now I'm trying to make a decision on my portfolio because I've anchored in on the higher number. Mm-hmm. Once I identify that I feel like I might have that bias, how do I either prove that and how do I then make a better decision?
Yep. So the first one, two different ways. If you've had the portfolio for an extended period of time, you've had the plan for an extended period of time, a couple of years, 2, 3, 4 years, go back. Don't make sure you're not anchored into its highest value. If you've got to anchor into anything, anchor into your principal amount. Because at that stage, more than likely, if you've owned it long enough, you're up despite your recent losses.
Yeah.
Right?
And then the question is, is the return you've been getting over the last few years a reasonable return for the risk you're taking on?
Correct. Reasonable for the risk you're taking on and reasonable for the goal you're attempting to achieve. Right. If you need to earn 5% a year to have a secure retirement, you shouldn't be targeting 10. Right. You're taking on too much risk. Yeah. You also shouldn't be targeting 1 because you're not taking on enough risk. The last one, if you haven't had the portfolio the plan for any period of time and you're actually down, right? Then again, if you're going to anchor into anything, anchor into the principle you're down, but go back and make sure that you understand the tenets of the plan, the tenets of the portfolio, that they're sound and and it makes sense going forward.
Yeah. So it goes back to that same concept that your ability to realize that you're making a decision or you're starting to go down the path of making a decision because of emotion. I've anchored to the high water mark as your first piece. Self-awareness is self-development. I'm aware that I'm about to make a decision based on a biases of anchoring. At that point, then it's, okay, let me look in my situation. Typically the anchor is going to be on high water mark of a portfolio. Let me look at my principal and then see, is that rate of return for the risk I'm going in line with what it's supposed to be over time?
Correct.
And so getting those numbers from whether it's the website that you're your portfolio and the company you're working with is on there, and you can take a look at that over time rate of return. And then also looking at versus the way that you have your portfolio set up between bonds, stocks, whatever the diversified portfolio you have, what return should you be targeting?
Right.
And then at that point, it's starting to then decide on, okay, if I'm happy with my overall rate of return, then I might want to stay the course.
Correct.
And I'm just letting a bias start to affect me to make a change.
Correct.
But if I'm not happy with that overtime rate of return, then it's okay, let me go back to my investment plan, my financial plan, and decide if it's still in line. And then should I make changes? Because now you're making changes based on real fact and numbers, right, and not an emotional piece to it.
Like everything we've talked about and will talk about, when you feel your emotion is overriding your logic, take a deep breath, slow down, and search for education, for information that will help combat that emotional irrationality.
And that's your filter. You're going to make an investment decision. Let's make sure you're making an investment decision on facts, not emotions.
Correct.
Another great episode there, Dr. Hell. I
appreciate it, man.
I'll catch up with you soon.
You got it.
Thanks for tuning in. If you found this episode helpful, why not spread the knowledge? Share it with a colleague who can use a dose of insight. Just shoot them a quick text or email with the episode link. Together, let's unlock more valuable insights in the next episode.